Welcome to Radio Omnicore, your source for powerful stories and insights into authentic leadership. In episode 54, we're honored to host Mbuso Ntuli, an operations manager at a prominent pharmaceutical manufacturing company. Mbuso shares a heartfelt and open account of his upbringing, crediting his mother, aunties, and grandmother for shaping his humble and people centered leadership style. Throughout our conversation, Mbuso challenges the old paradigms of power driven leadership, showing how self awareness and personal growth have guided his journey. We'll explore his reflections on the feedback he's received from critics, his personal triggers, and his belief in continuous self improvement. This episode is full of wisdom and thought provoking insights that every leader can learn from. I'm your host, Colleen McClintock, joined by my insightful co host, Hilton Rudnick. And now, here's our conversation with Mbuso Ntuli. Welcome, everyone, to Radio Omnicore. It's so wonderful to have you, Mbuso, as a guest, and great to see you, Hilton. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to be here while we get to understand Mbuso's leadership approach and philosophy. I'm sure he's got a lot to teach us.
Indeed. Indeed. The leadership series is just so informative. Mbuso and I have worked together on some very interesting projects in the business that he works in, and I found myself again just taking notes when I'm in meetings with him and just experiencing his absolute passion for leadership and developing his staff. And I thought, let's make this formal and get Mbuso into the studio and pick his brain about leadership and, what makes his soul sing when it comes to that. So why don't you just kick off, Mbuso, tell us a bit about what got you so passionate about leadership and,
Mm.
your story getting there.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and lovely meeting you again, Hilton. I think, yeah, it was firstly very exciting to have the opportunity to join you in this podcast. I think it is a very daunting experience to talk about what you're passionate about because I think there are certain people, and I think I'm one of them, that just wants to do, right? And it's such a challenge to actually start, what's the word, sort of reflecting back and being able to discuss it. So, leadership, I think, has been my passion since I was a very young man. I think one of the reasons that I was very passionate about was the changes that leadership could bring. I think living in South Africa, being a Black man, you understand the importance of leadership in any sphere that you're in. And the impact that leadership can have on a person's development in an organization, politically, globally, is really, really significant. And I think I've seen a lot of changes happen with good leadership, and I've seen a lot of organizations or people actually digress because of poor leadership. So it is really a fundamental aspect into growth and prosperity in many facets. And so I think that's why I'm really interested and passionate about it. One thing that makes it really tricky is because it is so sometimes insidious and it doesn't scream out and it doesn't shout. And many people focus on hot skills, on KPIs in making sure that there's performance, there's growth, there's outputs. But often what underpins all of that is a culture that is set by a leader or by an organization's leadership that helps organizations, people grow. So that's why I'm passionate about it. Yeah.
I mean, maybe, Mbuso, just give us a bit of a rundown on your leadership philosophy in a nutshell.
So, my background is a trained pharmacist, and I started working at a multinational pharmaceutical company, which is Swiss based, after leaving varsity. And I think my first introduction with leadership was coming into the space and having to manage or lead a group of individuals or employees that have got more than 20 years experience in that particular area. Now, you can imagine the first thing that you think about technically is what can I teach or what can I impart with this group or this cohort. So I think that was the first indication, Hilton, of the fact that technical skill is really, really important, but it ends at a particular point in time. So, what got me into actual leadership is seeing people that actually will technically know more than you, but having to set a vision and allow them to collaborate for a common goal. So my leadership journey, I think one started in that facet or in that area, and I've grown in the organization year on year from there. But my leadership style is one of a transformative leader, but I also don't want to use that loosely, but more about making sure that people grow within the ambit of my leadership, that an organization grows within the ambit of my leadership. And I think that will only happen because I see myself as a support base for any organization or for any group of people that I work with. And so that servitude or that perspective of saying, I am here to support you, to enable you to do a better job, and for you to grow personally and for you to see your contribution within this organization. I think this is basically the fundamental principle of my leadership. I never want to leave an organization or a role without being confident about the fact that I took it from point A to point B or C or even Z. And I think that for me, in a positive way, is how I try to lead.
So, one of the things I've noticed about you is that it seems effortless for you to create psychological safety. It feels like you're so approachable, you're open, you're transparent, you're authentic. And I've just watched you interact with all levels of people. There are no airs and graces. You don't rest in the power of your role at all or the status of your role.
Mm,
So, how do you get that right? How do you get that psychological safety
mm.
going?
So I think that psychological safety term I'm going to come to, I mean, when I answer this question in the second part, I think the first part in raising this, and I think you mentioned a big thing, I don't care for roles or titles. And I think that started when I was really young, right? I grew up in a family of really strong women, and I was raised by women only. And my parents were educated, and they used to, during school holidays or even during the week, having to clean in the house or having to prepare and do chores. And I think I remember the one significant time where I was studying at Wits. A neighbor walked into the house and said, why is he cleaning? Why is he on his knees mopping, like cleaning the floor, And one of my aunts responded and said, listen, he's going to do it, whether he's a Wits graduate or a UCT graduate or a British graduate, because it's not about what he does. It's about the fact that he is a human and he is a child in this house and he will do what everyone else does, right? So there is no prestige around you getting your qualifications. Your qualifications are yours, and so therefore everyone is who they are, and everyone has got something to contribute in a household, and that's not about qualifications or title. So when you get into this house, you are Mbuso Ntuli, and that's it, right? And so I think I've taken that philosophy or that principle in every area of work that I've sort of worked in. And so that's why for me, when I started working, even in the current organization that I'm in, I said to them, I'm not here to be anyone's boss or head of operations or manager. I am here to support you. And I think that's a philosophy that I use because I know the strength that brings about. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is that people then will bring in their best into work because they know that it will be valued equally to an MD's or equally to an operator's or equally to the cleaner that takes care of the area that we're working within. I think for me, it's a principle that I grew up with, and it's really not important. I think your title is not important. Who you are and how you show up at work should be a testament of the amount of respect I give you and the amount of respect your peers should give you. So that term psychological safety, I think, is so important because people bring their best selves to any environment when they know that you will hold them accountable, but it is about the work. And you really want them to feel that they are coming into a workspace giving their all and they'll be appreciated, rewarded, and also just acknowledged. And I think if you acknowledge somebody from a human perspective and respect them and authentically so, right? And I think don't pay lip service to respect, I think then you create an environment where people flourish.
I mean, maybe just circling back to something that you were talking about earlier, where you said, whatever, you're leading a whole lot of people who are specialists, they've got technical skills that you don't have,
Mm.
they different part of the business to you. What do you focus on every day? What does your day look like? Where does your energy go? as a leader? You can only prioritize so much. And what do you see yourself doing every day?
All right, that's a very tricky question, I think, Hilton, because every day is very different. And as a leader, and I mean, you'd read all these journals around a leader's top three or top 20% of things that they need to focus on in terms of the Pareto rule or, 80-20 rule, etc. So there's this analogy that I'd like to bring up is when I was presenting at a conference that we had, I spoke about this mythological creature called Hydra. And it was the sea creature basically in Greek mythology that has got multiple heads, right? And every time that the heads are chopped off, another head would pop up, right? So my environment is an environment where things are constantly changing. There's always risks, there's always issues. Initially, when I started working, I thought, okay, as a leader, I've stopped this and I've solved this problem. 2 seconds later, another problem arises, which is of equal magnitude. So, on a daily basis, it's about identifying what causes the biggest risks to your organization. But I think most importantly, it's based on your strategy. So once you're clear around where you're going and what I need to achieve or what I want to achieve, I am able to, on a daily basis, assess what my priorities are and how I deal with them. These will vary day to day, but fundamentally they lead to a particular goal that I would have set either in the beginning of the year or in the beginning of the financial year that my team would know. So as I'm thinking of this metaphorically, this mythical structure that like has got all these heads, I know that I will not be able to chop off all its heads, right? It's a big creature that's coming at me, but you attack the head that is going to have the biggest negative impact on you. So I think that's how I attack each and every single day. So very different, but I think it's also at the core keeping your pulse in what goes on in an organization through people and through you understanding what your vision is for an organization or any goal that one sets for themselves.
I mean, I suppose part of it is the tension that we have of like slipping back into operational stuff versus keeping our eye on the relevance and future of the organization to make sure that you're doing what you have to help it grow and expand. And I mean, I think like particularly you comes like out of a pharmaceutical background. Is there temptation to do the stuff that you were good at and become a super pharmacist rather than a leader?
Yeah. So absolutely, absolutely. I mean, because you're always drawn into this, and I got some very good advice from one of my mentors when I just started off. And so there's this department that actually think helped develop me into a leader that I'm really passionate about, and I think it's one of the departments within a manufacturing or a pharmaceutical environment. And I knew everything. I mean, I had in my previous company, I had really had a turnaround strategy for this department, had good budgets. Really, this department soared, right? So when I started in the organization I'm currently at, it was just one department out of maybe about 10 departments that I have to oversee. And what my friend and mentor at the time had said to me, the one biggest thing that you need to do is avoid the department that you know the most, right? Because you will see all the blind spots, you will see all the negative things in the department that you know, and you will mess up. Because what you'll end up doing is you start undermining the people that are in that department, not actually understanding that culture really well, and you start making premature changes. Right. So I think that element helps me always take a step back and ask myself the question first: what might I not know in this situation that other people need to sort of contribute to before I make a decision? And so, Hilton, it's also about removing the ego, I think, and removing yourself and not wanting to place yourself at center stage as a leader. And also, just like always reflecting back, like, I'm not the smartest person in this room. And so, what does everyone else have to contribute before I make the decision? Because often the decisions come without your intervention. And sometimes they do, but often, in order for you to prevent interfering or making the wrong decisions is just to take a step back. And I think most of the time, the ego is what really impacts a lot of leaders. And I must admit, and I think I don't know whether people declare this a lot, is I get a lot of help, right? And whether it's through coaching or it's through therapy. I think as a leader, that is very important because, as the saying goes, like the higher you go, the more lonely it is. And so, therefore, you need to ventilate. And sometimes you definitely cannot ventilate in the office space because you might be feeling like I need to sort of guide these team members. So, what you do is you ventilate in therapy. And I think that is one of the reasons that help me be able to always be centered around what my own personal mission is and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
How do you balance a piece around developing people in the business requirements? Because you are very passionate about being collaborative. Like you've just spoken, you don't just
Mm,
go make unilateral decisions. And even though you do know the answers, often you wait and you pull it out of people and you get them to dig deep. So you do a lot of development of your staff versus, you're in a complex environment. You've got
mm,
tricky stuff going on there. How do you manage to
yeah.
balance leadership versus development versus, hit the manufacturing targets?
There's a situation, and I love talking in examples because I'm drawing on and reflecting as we're having this discussion, which is so great. I think the biggest thing is, and I'm going to say it. Firstly, maybe explain what I've done, and then I'll be able to define, I think, what has worked for me. We've had a tough situation, or recently a really tough situation that we had to get through, and it involved very serious stakeholders, unions, etc. One of the biggest things that, even in reflecting back, is communication, communication, and communicating to the extent that everyone understands the transparency, right? So the question that you're
Mm,
asking me, Colleen, is how do I make sure to balance people's growth with what business requires? Firstly, is to make them understand, firstly, what the business requires. I think that's a first thing, or where the business is at, or the difficult situation. Let people understand what you're trying to do first, and then you assess them authentically, either through your one on ones or coaching or understanding what their career aspirations are, and then trying to tell them and be transparent to say, this is where the organization is going. I do see you here. Where do you see yourself? And how do you best fit into what we're doing? And then I can support you in terms of your career aspirations. Now, what is very nice is once employees or team members understand your purpose and where the business is going, they're able to define already their career aspirations. And they will already find a way to slot in a way that has a positive outcomes. And so therefore it becomes very organic and it becomes really intuitive, right? So you often think, I didn't make a calculated decision around that. It just worked out. And the reason that it worked out is
easy.
because you were transparent around where you're going, but also you had a very good relationship with your employees and an understanding of where they're going in order for it to align and
E.
progress forward. They
Mm.
do not happen exclusively. And so you need to bring these two
Mm.
elements together as much as possible.
Do you find that you have anything that really triggers you as a leader, the stuff that really gets under your skin and you feel, I've got to go sort this out?
I'll tell you this, Hilton. Therapy helps a lot in making sure that you know your triggers. I do recall, so I had the opportunity of studying in the UK in Oxford, and I did my postgrad in the UK. And one of the first courses was actually learning oneself or understanding yourself. And at the time, like, it didn't make sense. It'd be like, why the hell did I pay all this money to learn about myself? Like, you know yourself, right? I mean, you got to this point because you know yourself. So why do they want me to know about myself? But geez, I tell you, I think self-acknowledgement or self-knowledge, or just understanding what triggers you, and that's such a brilliant question, because you are able to identify your triggers earlier, right? So there's a lot that triggers me, but sometimes you don't realize that these things were triggering you because you don't have self-awareness. And so I would say to you right now, what triggers me is injustice or blatant unfairness without any consideration. I think that's something that definitely triggers me. I think another thing that triggers me, so I think that's one of the biggest ones. I think operationally or organizationally or professionally, I think that injustice does do that a lot, because I do find that if there's transparency and honesty and openness and communication, like people will understand that situations might not favor them, right? But that doesn't become injustice. It just means that the situation is not favoring them at a particular point. On a personal level, before I also was intentional around, and I'm so passionate about this thing about removing your ego, is when one feels deliberately marginalized, and that could be with your own team members, or that could be with senior, or and then you start feeling like, is this person saying this because they assume a particular, like they assume something about my appearance, or you're young, or you're an African leader, and so therefore you've got this. But I've found that I've turned it around actually, Hilton, and now it started to work for me, right? So you sit and you attend a meeting and you are unassuming and you wear sneakers and you come to work and you just relax. And when visitors come or clients come and they look at the other taller, bigger person that is much older, and they're like, yes, sir, yes, boss. And then they said, no, actually, he's the one that's actually the. So that has become very comical for me. And it's so interesting to see. And so I think I've turned that around to be like, actually, it is the power to it, right? Because if you remove your ego and you allow people to actually reveal themselves, you actually get an upper hand because they have made assumptions that are not correct. And it allows you to actually understand and gives you an indication of the professional people that they are. So yeah.
Well, like when you say injustice, do you mean like if you see someone in the organization being treated unfair? I mean, maybe you could put an example today.
I think sometimes it might be injustice in multiple forms. And I'll tell you recently, one thing that did trigger me is just consistency in how we apply certain things, or how organizations, or even at home, or even in the personal space, where if you are not intentional around what you're doing, often it is so easy to go with the incumbent or with what is familiar to you, right? And in some ways, to other individuals or other professionals, that would be injustice. So if I give you an example, that I have somebody that I absolutely think is a brilliant employee, right? And they're consistently working and they're doing such a good job all the time. Now, without matrix and without objectivity, Hilton, what I would end up doing is remunerating that person really well, right? And yes, they are helping me. So there is no bias there. They are doing a great deal of job. But what you are in essence doing as a leader by doing that is, and not creating a system, is that you are making the other people that are trying hard, because you don't have a matrix, be in be at a deficit, right? Because the measurement is not the same and there's no criteria. So therefore the ability to
Mm.
contribute equally and be remunerated as such is not there, because I just don't have a matrix. And it's not to say that that relationship between myself and this one employee that I'm remunerating well is fraught or is below board. It just means that I've got preferences to a particular person, and therefore I'm actually creating an injustice to people around them, right? That are also probably contributing heavily. Only because I, as a leader, have not created sustainable systems to make sure that it removes that. So I hope that's given you a bit of an example, Hilton. Yeah.
I'm so interested about what you studied at Oxford. How was that? And what did you leave with from a leadership point of view?
So I had two options before I went to Oxford, and I think one of them was to study an MBA or to study strategic organizational leadership. And at the time, I thought, geez, like I think one of the biggest, people love putting in their resumes and like talking about, oh, I did an MBA and Porter and this and financially that. And then I just thought to myself, as things progressed in life with evolution, when the industrialization happened, you had a lot more engineers. When banking firms started popping up in South Africa, then you had a lot of CAs. And in business, then you had a lot of MBA graduates. And I think one thing that we don't have a lot of is strategic leaders that are intentional around what they are trying to do and not being biased to finances. And I see that really strongly, because that is very important for you to keep any organization open. Money, like, it makes the world go round, right? So you understand the need for that to keep people employed, to keep a company really vibrant and alive. But it is even more important to make sure that there's sustainability. And sustainability, I feel, is through how an organization runs and performs, because the money comes with intentional leadership. And so I then studied organizational leadership and strategy in Oxford. And I basically focused more on strategy, more on reward systems, more on being able to use resources that you've got to maintain competitive advantage and actually allowing people to be authentically who they are, because that's what gives an organization that blueprint, right? It's not about how they compare to anyone else, it's about them being individuals in that sense and having that uniqueness. And I think that can give an organization its competitive advantage.
No, I was just curious, why pharmacy when you started your studies? What made you choose pharmacy?
So I chose pharmacy because I've always wanted to be in the healthcare space. I think I really think that healthcare is really important for people's livelihood and lifestyle and the ability of people to have productive and really joyful and happy lives. So I think healthcare has always been a passion of mine. I did, and I think this is part of my journey when I was growing up, is I did always think that I was really not good in science. All right. And I know you might ask yourself, but this I turned out to be in one of the most scientific industries. But I thought I was really not good in science. And so therefore at school I never took up science at all. And but I
Hmm.
really became really good in maths. And one of my teachers at the time really saw a lot of potential in me. But then she really supported, mentored, and I actually became like a real boffin or an A student in math, to the point that when I applied, so I then did not apply for medicine, which was something that I was really, really wanting to do because I thought I don't have science. And I think at the time I was not doing my research. So I just said, I don't have a science background. I've just got maths. So I'm going to take a hit and I'm going to choose pharmacy. And then I chose accounting and then I chose business administration. And I was chosen then for pharmacy, right? So my first choice. And I'm like, great, And so pharmacy for me then was really good. I get into this university and I remember we sitting in a cohort with doctors because at first year, I think it's a BSc. So you've got doctors, you've got nurses, you've got pharmacists, etc. We're all in this cohort. And I know that if there's any one of my former students or my colleagues that know this about me, they know that I raised my hand in first year in the science class, which is a major, right, for doctors and pharmacists. And then I asked, what's an atom? And an atom is really the building block of like science that's studied in. And I think I was kicked out of class because I think the lecturer at the time thought I was trying to make a fool of them by asking what's an atom in a major. So I went out. But what was so interesting about that is, I mean, I failed my first year actually. So I was trying so hard. And this lecturer saw me and she said to me, Mbuso, you got in here because you are really strong. We see your intellect, all your other subjects you're passing. But with science, you're literally getting 4%, right? But I know you've got the ability to do university science without the high school background. And so I pushed hard. I think that love for pharmacy also came through that process where I think I ended up in second year with one of the highest chemistry marks, I think, and science marks because I just pushed literally from 4% to around averaging at around 80. And I think that was a big
Wow.
achievement. So I think the pharmacy came from there, that striving. I did want to be, I must admit, I did want to be a doctor initially, but I think I love how it turned out. And I think it was that hard work and that really just got me to get to what I'm doing now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot in common between pharmacy and leadership because in pharmacy, you're combining these disparate chemicals together to create something helpful for people. And in leadership, you're bringing the attributes of people together in the best possible way. That's also benevolent. So there's like a real link. There's a good metaphor in there somewhere, but that's not really my question that I wanted to ask. As a leader, it sounds like you're a very benevolent leader. You've got a leadership philosophy and it's a very humanistic philosophy. How do you ensure uniform experience of leadership throughout the organization? You've got people who are not you and who do things differently. How do you try culturally make sure that people lead in a way that is part of your charter in a way?
You know what's so tricky, Hilton? Thank you very much for that question because I think you'd ask yourself if there's probably not, which is something that I need to do, maybe not intentional about it because sometimes I think of that intentionality as saying, how do I manipulate people in order for them to work the way I do, right? I think how I try to influence is probably by not showing an ego, and I think I'm going to go back to that, and trying to also be not subservient, but have servant leadership even towards other leaders, and trying to show them that I'm here to support them as well, right? Often, I think I use my ability for them to see what I'm doing and it yielding results less than instructing or directing or telling them. So I think it's more through my actions. If I identify leaders who've got a very different approach to me, I think maybe my philosophy would be working with them with the very same teams and seeing different outcomes and allowing them to basically take what they can. Because you also, I remember having this one conversation with a colleague, a senior director, and this person is really smart in finance and she's really brilliant. And she was saying, "Oh, Muso, I'm inspired by how you actually lead and how you manage your teams and how you lead your teams and this organization." And then I said to her, "But I'm also inspired by how you keep me accountable as a leader because I'm not a finance person." And so, therefore, I've seen a transition of her moving more to my side of leadership style, and then me getting that support from her from that finance style. And it's creating such a beautiful sweet spot of finance and leadership that we both are taking from each other and collaborating in a way that is also authentic, but like is really progressive. And so I would give that as an example of how I influence other leaders, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to talk about failure. And I guess it also speaks to psychological safety. And that's the hard part of leadership where people aren't actually showing up and you've done repeated coaching or redirection, help. How do you handle failure in the organization like that?
Definitely, Colleen, something I've had to learn to do. I think there's also a level of perfectionism that I do have, like trying to excel. And maybe let me answer the simpler part of it. I think with people that I would have coached or would have developed, and then I still see a bit of failure in the organization where it's not improving, I think what does become authentic is if you do it really well. And I'll give an example here where I had a situation with maybe not in this organization, but a senior manager that I would be working with, and this person was doing things really not correct. And you try and you say, okay, let's move in that direction. But you see, there would be many elements of things that are at play, right? So whether it's respect or whether it's undermining is there. But then what you do is when a situation does happen, and so if an audit does happen and that person realizes what they've been doing, even from an outsider, and then I intervened and said, do we see how we got here? And because there's been all these lessons that have happened, that employee often than not says, I accept why I have to have repercussions or consequences of what has happened. Right. And so, therefore, this is how I also deal with that because you then have a change where the person has really assimilated that this was not an attack on them as individuals, but a performance failure. Right.
Yeah.
How I've dealt with failure with team members, with systems, is making them actually realize inherently what they've done wrong. And I think then it becomes very easy to hold people accountable and to exercise repercussions, right? So if you've said something once, you've said
Mhm.
something twice, and people still continue, then you just express as well, said, okay, the consequences of this are going to be this. It's up to you. It's absolutely up to you how this turns out. And you'd often see how
Mhm.
people also come back in line. And so this is the method that I've used. I think I've got
Mhm.
many examples of these. Thank you for asking that question because one last example before I stop is, I think in my previous, I had a huge team that I was working with. I think at that time, maybe about 150. And I was
Sure.
just a new manager with them. And I was still very young and they were really senior and they were really much more mature than I am. And I think they'd gotten to know me, right? So they'd started taking chances. Such a big team starts
Mhm.
coming in not on time, and they start like just taking advantage of my style. So I called
Mm.
them into an to a
Mm.
whole auditorium room. I called them into an auditorium room, and then I just said to them, "So I'm not going to change who I am because of what you're doing. This is what I expect. I respect every one of you. It's your decision how this turns out." And I don't think I ever had that same situation happen again.
Wow.
So I think to verbalize it, I think it's also in respecting that people are adults and they're professionals, and so therefore we don't treat them like kids. Yeah.
So, I mean, I know you're on a quest for, continual development, self-reflection. What would your worst critic say are the leadership attributes that you need to address?
Ah, Hilton. This is so profound. And Colleen, I would feel like, okay, but I've sometimes had it a lot. I think my worst critic would be one that sometimes has not seen the benefits, and they'd say that Mbuso is too soft. So they'd say that he needs to be firmer and he needs to be direct and he needs to show that he's boss. I've gotten that a lot, right? I think my worst critic would probably say that. But then I also look at that critic and I think, oh, okay, I know where you stand in the leadership spectrum.
1970.
Yeah. And look, it worked where it worked, right? And so I'm not going to disagree with it. And I'm going to keep saying to a critic of mine is that, like, that's not who I am, right? And that's okay. But I think that's what my
Mm.
worst critic would say.
And then are you able to flip into like a more firmer version of yourself? A more, I mean, I don't want to say autocratic, but like a version of yourself that can take the situation and just deal decisively and sort it out.
Absolutely. I think I don't do that when there's no need, right? Or where there's no intention. But when there is, based on the vision, based on the intention, and based on the goal, very easy to make really decisive decisions. Really easy. But it has to also always come from somewhere, right? So I'm not going to sit in a meeting and show my authority by just saying, you do that and you do that. No, I mean, I think then I'm failing because then if people are not doing what they need to be doing, that means they're not clear on the purpose. But decisive leadership, absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely. But it doesn't have
Mhm.
to take a certain tone, right? It doesn't have to take a
Mm.
tone. It doesn't have to it can just be in a very calm, this is where we need to go. Do you all understand why we are going in that direction? And that's it.
If you look at the journey again of all the different roles that you've held and where you're at now, where are you going? Where's the next step for your career and where do you want to see yourself ending up?
I always try to test myself. So I think what I'm testing myself is, I think, am I able to change another organization? Am I able to change this organization even more and not necessarily fix, but put it in a better state at a bigger scale with bigger impact? And so I think I'm always yearning or looking for bigger challenges, not to maintain status quo. I think someone articulated to me is like, Mbuso, you are not a maintainer. And I agree, I'm not a maintainer, but I am a more like turnaround, but with
Mm.
intention and to move organizations in a better place. One thing that I still need to sort of figure out in my mind is I've always felt like organizations, and I've only worked in corporate, right? So in any leadership organization where we sit right now in the world, organizations have the power to really transform lives and livelihoods. And so I think for
Mm.
me is where I'm going in the future is going to do that in more global platforms, and I think with a far broader reach, and I see this, livelihoods are transformed for the better and organizations are transformed for the better. That's as broad as you're going to get, Hilton and Colleen. Yeah.
We're not going to get the tea. You're not spilling the tea.
Not yet.
So, last question from me. What's the one leadership decision you wish that you didn't make?
Very good question. I think definitely this was when I compromised the intention of what I was doing and let my softer side or wanting to please get the better of me earlier on in my career. I think it was a couple of decisions that I had made. And look, they didn't have a negative impact, but they just delayed something and they really broke, I think, the relationship that I had with certain team members. Because had I been still really clear and not focused on individuals' needs as well, and more also on the collective and what we need to get to, I think I would have made a better decision. So I think it's not one decision, Hilton. It's probably where I was at as a leader and even myself from a self awareness perspective, trying to accommodate everybody. right? And sometimes I know that there's definitely no way that you can do that. And so I think that is a journey that I still to this day, Hilton, am working towards. And I think that understanding that it's not about every individual because you will never be able to support everyone.
Saying no, it's hard.
Yeah.
I want to go back to, for me, a very poignant part of the podcast where you were speaking about how you were raised by women
Mm,
and how you were taught from a very young age to, you know, to treat everyone equally, to roll up your sleeves, very much a hands on leader. And
mm.
as you reflect, you know, just the impact that that's had on you as a leadership. And I was wondering if your aunt is still around, what she would be saying as to where you've come in life and those values that, you know, they were so prominently instilled in you as you grew up in that household.
I mean, they're all there right now, Colleen, and I'm so blessed to be able to
Oh,
be with them and to actually take them out every once in a while and to actually just share certain
oh,
milestones with them right now. Um, I definitely appreciate that. And look, I think that community that I grew up around, and it was four women, including my gran. And I think back in the day when I was growing up, so like in 1987, those were probably very difficult circumstances for them. So they probably came together through necessity, but it produced such a beautiful thing. And I think that element of collaboration, support, and not giving up, I think is something that I carry on. And fortunately, and I'm really blessed to say that they're all still alive right now. And to a large extent, that way of living and that livelihood has not changed too much. And I'm grateful for it.
mm. I think they definitely have impacted the way you lead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes I would say, I mean, to each, and thank you, because Hilton asked that one question, right? What would your biggest detractor say about you? And that it was such an important thing to actually also realize because there are disadvantages, I think, with sometimes how I lead, right? And I think I know them because there's a lot of doubt, I think, initially. Often, always you have to prove yourself. And then also, you are
Mm,
sometimes seen as not being decisive, right? And so, these are the things until people start seeing results. Because often, with the negative thing about how I grew up as well, is steady, but authentically. And so, therefore, because we also live in an instant gratification type of world and in business, you want quarter one results immediately. You want half year results. You want to go to the stock market and tell them around how the company is like doing miraculously. And then what happens after 2, 3 years? All of it just collapses, right? To have gradual changes and growth sustained over a long period is not really glamorized anymore or really respected anymore, I feel sometimes. So I think that's one of the disadvantages.
mm,
And so often you need to really be patient and try to prove to people, so it does come with its disadvantages, but I would take those disadvantages any day.
exactly.
Mm.
Well, I think that's a wrap. Any final comments, questions? I can't believe how quickly the time's gone. It's been so fascinating listening to all your answers. I think you got a bit grilled today by Hilton.
You know what? Hilton took me back because now I'll be like, oh my gosh, Hilton, I've got detractors, right? And then I have to look back and be like, actually, what are they saying about me now, right? But um, but nothing like I mean, that is so brilliant because it actually keeps you on your toes and it just keeps you humble, right? And I think a lot of us leaders need that. We always need that,
Mm,
and I think thank you,
mm,
and I'm always being open to that. So thank you so much. I think it was lovely chatting to you, Hilton and Colleen, and thank for the ability to just share, right? So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's so inspiring to chat to someone who's so open and available to share.
Mm.
And that wraps up our conversation with Mbuso Ntuli. His story is a powerful reminder that leadership is about humility, self awareness, and a commitment to continuous self growth. We're grateful to Mbuso for being so candid and sharing how his upbringing has shaped his values as a modern leader. A big thank you to our producer, Sia, for making this episode possible, and to my co host, Hilton Rudnick, for always bringing such thoughtful contributions to our discussions. So if you enjoyed this episode today, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to Radio Omnicore. Your support helps us continue bringing insightful and meaningful conversations to your ears. Until next time, lead with heart, stay humble, and never stop growing. Thanks for tuning in.